Today, we are honored to have here on campus one of our nation's most respected leaders. And she has been referred to by other world leaders as a wise and thoughtful leader. She is someone who has sat across from dictators and allies and had been an advocate for the American people, our nation, and the ideal of democracy around the world. As Secretary of State, Dr. Albright reinforced America's alliances, advocated democracy and human rights around the globe, and promoted American trade and business while striving to increase labor and environmental standards abroad. She was a strong advocate of Arab-Israeli peace and a moral force for action in the Balkans. She played a critical role in the Clinton administration's successful efforts to end the wars in Bosnia and Kosovo. She understands the dynamics taking place around the globe and the challenges the next president of the United States will face. And as a top advisor to Senator Barack Obama, will share with us his vision for America's place in the world. She made history as the first woman to serve in the critical role of Secretary of State, and certainly is responsible for some of the cracks in that glass ceiling women have been knocking against. Yeah. Secretary Albright, we are fortunate to have you on campus here today, and it's an honor to introduce you to our community here at the University of Indianapolis. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming a great woman, a great American, and a superb Secretary of State, Dr. Madeline Albright.
And I want to especially thank Christel for telling people who I am, because not everybody always knows. I recently came back from China, and Chicago was the first port of entry, and I was there getting undressed for the security people, and put my stuff down on the conveyor belt, and the lady ahead of me said, "So where'd you get all those screw-top bottles? My bottles all leak." And I said, "Well, I got them at the Container Store." And then I was going through the magnetometers, and the TSA guard looked at me and he said, "Oh my God, it's you." He said, "I'm from Bosnia. We all love you in Bosnia, and you really help the people of Bosnia, and if it weren't for you, there wouldn't be a Bosnia, and can we have our picture taken?" So he stops the whole line, and we have our picture taken. And I go back to get my stuff, and the lady of the screw-top bottle says, "So what exactly happened here?" And I said, "Well, you know, I used to be Secretary of State." And she said, "Of Bosnia?" And you were straightening all that out. I really am very, very pleased to be on campus today and to have a chance to talk with all of you about what I consider a truly crucial election. I'm 71 years old. My first vote was for John Kennedy in Chicago, and I will never forget that. It clearly made a difference. And I have been in many election campaigns. I've worked for 2 Democratic presidents, and I've spent my whole life doing national security policy. And I truly do feel that we are at a crucial time when the choices that we are going to make really, really matter, not only for the American people, but as Christel and Judy said, for the whole world. And it does require, I think, a kind of knowledge about what the issues are and an understanding of why it makes such a difference. And I would like to spend a little bit of time talking a little bit about the framework that I see in terms of dealing with national security issues, and then take your questions. The world is a mess. That's a diplomatic term. We have lived probably in more dangerous times when Soviet missiles were pointed at the United States, but in terms of times when things are disconnected from each other in terms of institutions and how countries deal with each other, the existence of the nation state, the importance of sovereignty, an awful lot of information that is often wrong but has to be acted on, and a whole host of issues that I think make it very complicated. I think the next president is going to have to deal with what I call kind of 5 big umbrella issues. One, clearly, that is on people's minds, especially since we have just commemorated the anniversary of 9/11, is how to fight terrorism without creating more terrorists. Even former Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld said that we were creating more terrorists. And if you read about what is going on in Afghanistan or what happened in Yemen a couple of days ago when our embassy there was attacked, and various events in a variety of places, there clearly are terrorists. They aren't all linked to each other. And I think that the real problem that the U.S. Is a part of is in lumping everybody together. There are murderers. The people who hit us on 9/11 are murderers. They are not warriors. They are not mythical figures. They are murderers, and we do need to figure out how to deal with them, but we can't lump everybody together, and we can't call everybody who hates us Islamo-fascists and link various terms together that don't fit together. So fighting terrorism, I think, is an issue that the next president will have to deal with. The second is the proliferation of nuclear weapons. It is worrisome. And just 2 days ago, 3 days ago, we had a report from the International Atomic Energy Agency saying that, for instance, Iran was not open enough with what its program was and had in fact managed to make more centrifuges active. And that is just one part of the issue. And the North Koreans apparently are not are re-putting together some of their nuclear facilities. And the bargain that existed through the Non-Proliferation Treaty has been broken. It is a bargain in which the haves agreed to systematically disarm, and the have-nots agreed not to try to acquire nuclear weapons. And both parts of the bargain were broken. We, the U.S., are one of the haves. We have not systematically disarmed, and in fact the Bush administration has wanted to test a new generation of nuclear weapons bunker busters, which I think contributes to that part of the bargain being broken. And then, of course, we are seeing that Iran and North Korea has a nuclear weapon, Iran we don't know, and we are afraid that other countries will want to have more. So this is a problem. A nuclear technology is being traded around. There's kind of an arms bazaar, and with increasing problems with Russia, we're concerned about loose nukes. So we have to make sure that the worst weapons don't get into the hands of the worst people. The third big issue, I think, is that we have to restore the good name of democracy. I believe in democracy. I think that we all are exactly the same throughout the world, and people want to be able to make decisions about their own lives, and it begins with wanting to decide where you want to live and where you want to go to school, or what languages you learn, or what jobs you have, but ultimately moves up to wanting to make decisions about what kind of government you have. But as a result of what has happened in Iraq, democracy's gotten a bad name. You cannot impose democracy. That's an oxymoron. You can support democracy and promote it and provide countries with the tools of how to carry on their own democracy, not necessarily an American-style one, but you can't impose it. And so the next president not just because we believe in people's rights, but because it's better for America to have democracies around. It needs to restore the good name of democracy. I think the fourth big issue has to do with globalization. There are people that come to me and they say, well, so how do we stop globalization? Well, you can't stop globalization. But there has to be a way to manage it and to mitigate the negative aspects. And I think that the biggest negative aspect is the growing division between the rich and the poor. There are, in absolute numbers, fewer poor people in the world, but the gap between the rich and the poor is growing throughout the world and in the United States. I think one of the issues in this country now is the pressure that the middle class is under, and also that gap between the rich and the poor. Some of those rich, even as they screw up our companies, are walking away with huge salaries. So it is a problem here also. There is, and I underline this, absolutely no direct line between poverty and terrorism, but it doesn't take a lot of imagination to realize that if there are groups of people in a country that are marginalized outside the system and feel that they're not getting anything at all, they are much more likely to be seduced or recruited by those who don't like us. The fifth big issue is one which is a whole bundle of issues that I think is moving higher and higher in the priorities, and that's energy policy linked with environmental policy, rising food prices, and various aspects of the interaction of global health pandemics. They are kind of, that whole bundle fits together. And it's difficult because those issues don't seem as imminent. It's hard to talk about global warming. And I think that people, however, need to focus on it, and it has to be something that is very high on the agenda. And then the global financial situation, I think, all of a sudden, as others have said, really bring home how interdependent we are, how intricate the system is, and how, frankly, I feel this way, we don't have a clue what's going on. And that as I have been reading the papers in the last few days and trying to sort my way through it all, there clearly has been a very serious neglect of a whole host of issues. And it brings me to what I really think. I am a Democrat. I could be a member of the club here. I have often been asked by my kids, which is, what is the difference between a Democrat and a Republican? And in many ways, I've always said a Democrat believes the government can be on your side. We don't want government invading our lives in every way, but what we've seen in the last few days is actually that it's important to have a government that works on behalf of the people and looks at how to mitigate and regulate and try to figure out, to help us figure out how, in fact, we can have the benefits of existing in a democratic society. So under these 5, now 6, I think, umbrella issues, having added the global financial crisis, the next president also has to deal with 2 hot wars and their unintended consequences. I think history is going to show that Iraq is the greatest disaster in American foreign policy. That I wrote 2 or 3 years ago, I predicted that this would be true. Often, usually, when you write something in a book, you hope that you're right. I'm sorry I'm right. And it means that I think it's worse than Vietnam. Not obviously in terms of the number of Americans who've died, or Vietnamese versus Iraqis, but in terms of unintended consequences. And I think the biggest unintended consequence of that war is the rise of Iran. Iran, I think in many ways, could be seen as the country that's benefited the most, not only in terms of the nuclear programs that we are having trouble understanding, but in terms of a general sense of more power in the region. There is no reason not to see Iran as a responsible regional power, but we have no way of knowing what its intentions are because we don't talk about it. So the rise of Iran, then the destabilization in the whole region. What has happened in Iraq is that there are over 2 million refugees, Iraqi refugees, that are in neighboring countries that are trying to find jobs and figure out what to do. Then there are also about the same number of displaced Iraqis inside. And so generally the region is in a disequilibrium. What you also heard, for instance, several months ago, the Iraqi defense minister had said he wanted American forces to stay there until 2018 because there were bad people and bad weapons coming in from neighboring countries. That requires not a surge in the military, but a surge in diplomacy. Our military has done an amazing job, but Iraq cannot be solved by our military. It has to be solved politically and with diplomatic action in the region. But the biggest, I think, consequence, unintended consequence of Iraq is the loss of America's moral authority and the damage that it's done to our reputation. For a long time, if you mentioned America to people, they would think Omaha Beach or Iwo Jima or something that really showed the goodness of American power. Now, if you say the U.S. to people abroad, they think Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo. Those are symbols of an America that has exerted power in a way that has been damaging to whoever we have been using our power against, but our reputation. So the next president does have to deal with Iraq. And Senator Obama has made very clear from the very beginning that we have to get our troops out of Iraq, and that while we entered irresponsibly, we have to exit responsibly, and that we have to pursue that agenda in a very direct way. And then the second hot war is Afghanistan, which unfortunately has gotten worse. And Senator Obama has spoken in detail about the need to make clear that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda cannot win in Afghanistan, that it is a crucial area to us. It's actually the one from whence those who hit us came, not Iraq. And that we are going to have to deal with the situation in Afghanistan and what I say, the unintended consequence of Afghanistan, which is Pakistan. Pakistan has everything that gives you an international migraine. It has nuclear weapons, it has extremism, poverty, corruption, and a weak government. And yet we need it because it is so important in the struggle with Afghanistan. So 5, 6 umbrella issues, 2 hot wars and the unintended consequences. And what has to happen is we have to pay more attention to what's going on the African continent and in Latin America. In addition to the Bush people practicing unilateral policy, they have been practicing unidimensional foreign policy. They've only been interested in one part of the world with one tool, the military tool. And if we're going to have an America where our national interests are protected and where, in fact, we relate properly to the people around, we have to look at the rest of the world. And so I think, and Senator Obama has spoken at length about the importance of recognizing, when you talk about Africa, it's not one place. There are many countries there, and they differ from each other, and they require different policies. And some of them are very fragile and failed states, but some of them are very functional, and they want to have a relationship with the United States which is both economic and political. And in Latin America, we are making such a fuss about Hugo Chavez, when there are other countries there that are operating perfectly well, that want to be our friends, that have developing economies that we have to pay attention to. So it is a huge, huge agenda. And I think, just by mentioning all these issues, that it shows that we have to operate very differently. You can't do what has just happened, President Bush, of kind of dividing the world into those who are with us and those who are against us. Just the description of those issues shows that we have to deal with everybody. And while we are having problems with a more aggressive Russia, we do not want to go back to a Cold War. We have to find issues on which we agree and then push back on the ones where we have a difference. Every time anybody talks about China, you stick the adjective rising onto it. They are a growing power. They are huge, and they have a huge population with a very successful economy. And they are increasingly part of a global solution, I believe. They have helped in terms of dealing with North Korea. And India is the world's largest democracy, a natural friend, and we have to take them into consideration. We need Europeans as allies. We have more in common with them than with anybody else. It would help if they stopped examining themselves. But if they really, in fact, we all work together. But just talking about all that shows that we need cooperation. And what I find so impressive about Senator Obama is his approach, his desire to work with others, being able to put himself in the other guy's shoes, which I think is very important. Understanding that you have to talk to people you don't like. Actually, you have to make peace with your enemies, not with your friends. Being willing to have a dialogue, which is not always pleasant, but actually listening. And so he has that style. He also is, I think, very smart and has a great intellectual curiosity. I want a president who is confident, not certain. A confident president. Now, I know this doesn't happen in Indianapolis, but in Washington we have a tendency, people are smart, but they usually try to show how smart they are is by making the person sitting next to them look stupid. It is possible to have a lot of diverse views, and you want a leader who does not put up with people making each other look stupid, but who also elicits different ideas, feels comfortable with that, and then, on the basis of his own knowledge and principles, makes up his mind. A certain president doesn't even know what he doesn't know. And so, now, as I look around this audience, there are some people who are my age, but most of you are students here, and I think very rarely have we seen a time when the young people have been so active and are going to make a difference in this election. It is truly for many of you, this will be your first vote, and which is why I mentioned my first vote. And I think that the opportunity to work in a campaign and to do what is so exciting about democracy is to listen to what your fellow citizens are saying, go out and motivate them, understand what the candidates are talking about, making up your own mind, and then carrying out what is the greatest duty of a citizen, which is to vote. And it is a great privilege. I was not born in the United States. I came here when I was 11 years old from Czechoslovakia after it was taken over by the communists. I do think this is an exceptional country. It's exceptional in what it offers our people, the opportunities, the diversity, and the fact that we will, for the 44th time in our history, turn power over peacefully. No other country has done that. And we should try that. Opportunity to participate in that and to make it work. Democracy does not work if people don't go out there and really hustle in terms of getting other people to vote and to explain it. But also, as Christel said, it takes people knowing what the issues are. So I believe strongly in understanding America's role in the world. As I said, we are exceptional. We just should not ask that exceptions be made for us. And we need a president who understands what America's role is and the goodness of American power. And I am so convinced that Barack Obama is that president. So I'm very glad to answer more questions for you.
Secretary, thank you so much. A lot of young people here and a lot of people who may even be independents, where do you recommend we go for our information concerning the questions and concerning all of the issues today? Where do we get our information?
Well, you know, you've asked a difficult question because it's not television. And I think that it's always easy to blame the media, but in this case it's true, is because we are not getting real information. I think that there is a lot of information online, and the campaigns have a lot of information. There is such a thing known as newspapers, and I believe that it is very important to just seek out various sources of information. But what I think is not so much a lack of information, but a lack of truth. And so one of the things that happens is you have to look at multiple sources in order to figure out what is really happening. I also do think we're about to see the debates. I think that the debates, if the questioners actually ask something other than, you know, whether you're wearing a lapel pin or something, I think it will be very important to really get the views of the candidates on very specific issues and actually watch how their mind works. I think that is a very important part. But there is information, it just has to be collected in a way that you as an independent voter or as a Democratic or Republican voter can actually look at what the issues are and decide for yourself where the right information is. It's not, but it is not watching TV news, frankly. Yes?
I've always been a strong believer in the United Nations and the role it has played in the world. But the Bush administration and other administrations have really shown contempt for the United Nations. How would Senator Obama use America's relationship with the United Nations and maybe improve it to help the global policy of the United States rather than hurt it?
I'm a great believer in the United Nations, and so is he. I have to say, I always kid about the fact that the reason that I got my job as UN ambassador was that when I was a sophomore in high school in Denver, I won the Rocky Mountain United Nations contest. Because at that stage I was able to name 51 countries of the UN in alphabetical order. And I loved being ambassador to the UN. I thought that it had a huge opportunity after the paralysis of the Cold War and really looking at what the UN role could be in economic issues, environmental issues, on peacekeeping issues. The problem that the United States has had, even with presidents who've been supportive of the UN, is that we don't pay our bills. When I got there, there are really two kinds of bills that are there: dues, which you're supposed to do if you belong to a club. But our fiscal year begins in October, and everybody else's year begins in January. So we create an artificial financial crisis there. And then the peacekeeping bills were very large, and we weren't paying those. So when I think the UN can be very useful, but has to be reformed. And in order to reform it, you have to show goodwill towards it. And when I tried to suggest reforms, they'd say, "Where's your money?" And it led the British, our best friends, to actually deliver a line they'd waited over 200 years to say, which was representation without taxation. It is, I think, that one of the ways that we've all talked about, Senator Obama has indicated, is that the UN fulfills a very important role in terms of dealing with these fragile states and bringing in a structure that allows countries not to be told by the US exactly what to do, but envoys that are able to bring various people who disagree with each other together, or to put together peacekeeping operations that are multinational and to be able then, once the fighting is stopped, to try to help reconciliation. The UN also, we've talked about this now, has a peace-building commission so that, in fact, it is able to look at issues before they become terrible conflicts. Or it does have a human rights committee, which we used to be a member of good standing, and could bring cases of human rights violations in other countries there through an international prospect. So it does need to be fixed. I think the Security Council needs to be expanded in order to be more reflective of the world. Though I have to tell you, it's a little bit like the Rubik's Cube. When I was there, we suggested that Germany and Japan be permanent members of the Security Council, but the first country to come to me to object was Italy, to say we lost the war too, which is a rather peculiar campaign slogan. Or I would add, there are 15 members on the Security Council, and at any given time there are 5 Europeans, and when I was there, some of them were already members of the EU, and some wanted to be members of the EU. And so I'd go to somebody, a European, and I'd say, I need your help on X vote, and he'd say, I'm so sorry, I can't help you because the EU does not yet have a common position. So then a couple of days later, I'd go to the same person, I'd say, now can I have your help? And he'd say, sorry, I can't help you, but the EU does have a common position. And that means that the EU should have 1 permanent seat. But you know that the British and French are not going to give up their permanent seat. So that's the Rubik's Cube aspect of it. But it requires American support. It requires American engagement and understanding that the UN can play a role. But I've traveled around a lot with the US, and I must say, there are actually people who are terrified, Americans, of the UN. They think it has black helicopters that swoop down in the middle of the night and steal your lawn furniture. And then there are those who can't understand the UN or don't like it because it's full of foreigners, which frankly can't be helped.
Thank you so much for coming today. In light of the very complicated world issues that we've been talking about this morning, can you just speak a little bit about Senator McCain's judgment in these areas, especially in light of his selection of Governor Sarah Palin as his running mate, and potentially 1 heartbeat away from the presidency should he win? Thanks.
Well, let me talk about a few things that I've talked about and point out the things that Senator McCain has actually said about them. So instead of the UN, he would like to see something like the League of Democracies. I believe, as I said, in democracy, but I don't think you can decide that you're only going to deal with democracies. There are issues out there, and it's back into the kind of we versus them thing. I created something called the Community of Democracies, which was just a matter of getting democracies to help each other, best practices, etc. And I would love to see a democracy caucus within the UN, but for me, it just kind of shows a we versus they thing. I think his reaction to Russia, for instance, of saying that Russia should be kicked out of the G8. There are other ways of doing things. You could sometimes meet at the G7, but clearly by totally isolating Russia, you go back to kind of a 20th century Cold War mentality, and some of the statements that he's been making refer to that, and you have that feeling. He has a little bit of trouble keeping straight who the leaders of countries are. But I think that the important point here is that Senator Obama's first real presidential decision was to choose Joe Biden as his president. It shows something very, very important, not just in the person, because I know Joe Biden very well. I've testified before him many times. I think he knows more about every foreign policy issue and foreign leaders. He doesn't have to just show up at the UN to shake a few hands. I mean, he really knows the people. But to me, it showed something really essential about Barack Obama's character and method of governing. He is not afraid to have strong people around him. of somebody that will, in fact, I mean, and many of you, I'm sure, have read Doris Kearns' book, Team of Rivals, where Abraham Lincoln selected the people who would run against him to be in his cabinet. Joe Biden was one of those people, and yet Barack Obama's first move was to select Joe Biden. John McCain's first move was to select Governor Palin. I don't think I need to say any more.
What do you feel should be done about the housing crisis, and what does Senator Obama plan to do?
Well, clearly we have a huge issue in the housing and the mortgage crisis, and Senator Obama has talked about plans of trying to figure out how to have a mortgage rescue plan. He has also been talking more and more. He's meeting with a lot of his economic people today, looking generally at what the crisis is across the board in terms of how hardworking Americans are the ones that have been most hit by the economic issues, working in terms of having a coordinated tax plan where the middle classes would in fact be getting some tax money back and the richest people tax breaks would be ended. But it is a basic look at some of the problems with the foreclosures and figuring out what mechanism in order to try to help the people who have been not of their own volition hurt on something like this. But what he's doing is looking at an overall plan that deals with a whole, with many parts of it and not just one single aspect. I think he also recognizes how, in fact, everything is linked together. And to me, again, that is the way that his mind works, where he wants to solve the problems and wants to know how to help the American people and what help is required on it. But he has some very specific ways that he's now looking at the mortgage foreclosure problem. And also, and it goes back to a point that I made earlier, which is I think that what impresses me about Barack Obama is that he understands what the government can do for the American people and not simply say that we have no use for it or only direct it in a way that it benefits those who already have rather than those who have not. So, thank you all very much.